get your views from television news, you'll only hear stories that corporations choose. You'll only get to see what they want you to see. You're gonna have to read and decide what you believe. We all watched in horror 911. The planes hit the towers and the towers came down. Did you ever wonder how they fell so fast? Well, maybe that's a question that we're not supposed to ask. Don't you think it's strange? There were no fighter jets. Did someone give the order not to intercept? And if they really scrambled, then why'd they fly so slow? Maybe there's an answer that we don't want to know. And where was our president? George W., that fool. He was visiting with children at an elementary school. And when he heard the news, he didn't seem concerned. He just calmly read a picture book while all those people burned. The Bushes and Bin Ladens. Now what's that all about? While all of us were grounded, they flew his family out. Osama got his training from the CIA. Our soldiers took Afghanistan, they let him slip away. A new Pearl Harbor was their big chance to launch two wars that they'd planned in advance. Now we know they lied about weapons in Iraq. Did they allow the 9/11 attack? If you get your views from television news, you'll only hear stories that corporations choose. You'll only get to see what they want you to see. You're gonna have to read and decide what you believe.
Hi, I'm Bill Olson. You haven't seen me before. I've been behind the scenes on many of the videos you have seen, but I've just gotten to the point where I wonder what's wrong with people. We have enough information out here about 9/11, but nobody seems to really get motivated. There's plenty of information. People think there isn't. There's plenty of research. There's so much out there. I just don't know why. So I'm going to show you some. I'm going to have a series that starts after the first of the year, and I'll be showing you DVDs from my library. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and get this next frame set up. This is Lieutenant Colonel Robert Bowman, Air Force retired. He did 101 missions over Vietnam as an Air Force fighter pilot. And he's not exactly your left-wing, arm-waving radical. He was head of the Star Wars department, Star Wars program under Reagan, I think. Anyway, let me get this set up, and we'll have to pause this for a second. Okay, so here we go with Robert Bowman.
You are the shock troops battling to preserve our cherished freedoms. You know, our freedoms are not under attack from the remnants of Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist Party. They're under attack by the likes of John Ashcroft. They're trampled by Donald Rumsfeld. They're disdained by Dick Cheney. And they're not even understood by George W. Bush. The battle to preserve our freedoms is not taking place in Baghdad and Tikrit and Fallujah. It's taking place in peace marches and demonstrations in Ghirardelli Park in San Francisco, in Memorial Park in Oklahoma City, and in Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C. The front lines are right here. You are preserving our cherished freedoms by exercising them in spite of ridicule and opposition. The battle to preserve our freedoms is you. You are the foot soldiers protecting our civil rights. You're the Minutemen sounding the alarm against tyranny. You are upholding the spirit of the American Revolution. You are preserving the freedoms that the troops in the desert have a right to come back to. The troops getting shot at in Iraq are not protecting us. We are protecting them and their honor and their freedoms. We, my sisters and brothers, are protecting this nation by speaking truth to power. We're speaking truth to a pack of liars. We must do it loudly and fearlessly and courageously and joyfully, for we are the patriots. And when we speak, this is the truth that we proclaim. This war in Iraq has nothing to do with national security or freedom or democracy or human rights or protecting our allies or weapons of mass destruction or defeating terrorism or disarming Iraq. It has to do with money, it has to do with oil, and it has to do with raw imperial power. And it's based totally on lies. Those who forced this war on an unwilling world are guilty of violating the U.S. Constitution, the UN Charter, the Nuremberg Principles, and international law. What they have done is illegal, immoral, unconstitutional, and treason. Before this war started, we knew it would fracture NATO, split the United Nations, separate us from our allies, and destroy the great nation we inherited from our fathers who died in World War II. And it has. We knew it would make our beloved country feared and hated, an outcast from the world community, a pariah among the peoples, and the #1 rogue nation on earth. And it has. This is nothing but treason. We knew this sadistic corporate war would incense the Arab world, provide thousands of new Osama bin Ladens, and enormously increase the terrorist threat, and it has. We knew it would further endanger the American people and the British people and destroy our national security, and it has. This cabal of neoconservatives from PNAC who planned this war, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Libby, Pearl, Jeb Bush, even before W became president, they told us why they had to do it. They said, we need to occupy Iraq permanently in order to dominate Iran, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the southern Russian republics around the Caspian Sea. We need to control the entire Middle East and all its oil. And as other speakers have said, they knew the American people wouldn't stand for it, and they said so in their documents. And they said, unless there's that new Pearl Harbor. Well, 9/11 did supply that, and we've been lied to not only about the war, but about 9/11 itself. They ignored the warnings. More than that, we have mounting evidence that at least they made it impossible for those planes to be intercepted. If our government had merely did nothing, and I say that as an old interceptor pilot, I know the drill, I know what it takes, I know how long it takes, I know what the procedures are, I know what they were, and I know what they've changed them to. If our government had merely done nothing and allowed normal procedures to happen on that morning of 9/11, the Twin Towers would still be standing and thousands of dead Americans would still be alive. My sisters and brothers, that is treason. As a combat veteran, I will not stand idly by and watch our security destroyed by a president who went AWOL rather than serve in Vietnam. As one who's devoted his life to the security of this country, I will not stand by and watch an appointed president send our sons and daughters around the world to kill Arabs for the oil companies. Patriotism demands that I speak out and call it by its name. It is treason. I joined the Air Force a long time ago to protect our borders and our people, not the financial interests of Folgers, Chiquita Banana, Exxon, and Halliburton. We've had enough corporate wars. No more Iraqs, no more Kosovos, no more El Salvadors, no more Colombias. These are not isolated incidents of stupidity. They're part of a long, bloody history of foreign policy being conducted for the financial interests of the wealthy few. It is a new form of colonialism, all the benefits and none of the responsibilities. It violates our Constitution, it endangers our people, and it is treason. As a pilot who flew 101 combat missions in Vietnam, I swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that includes a renegade president. It's time for George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, and the whole oil mafia to be removed from office and indicted for treason. We owe it to the men and women serving in Iraq to end the occupation, restore our credibility and honor, and bring them home. And it could be done. If we had a president who would go to the UN and say, we made a horrible mistake, it was wrong, and we make you 3 commitments. 1, we give up all rights to Iraqi oil. 2, we give up all rights to the rebuilding contracts. If Halliburton wants a contract from you, they have to bid on it like everybody else. And they have to hire Iraqis to do the work for a change. Number 3, we give up all rights to those 14 permanent military bases we're building in Iraq at this time. Now, the people in the White House are not going to make those commitments, so they have to go, and all the puppeteers with them. You know, we are the people and we are sovereign. We are the patriots, and the whole world is with us. Everywhere in the country that they have a free press, all over the world, people know the facts, and they are with us, not the people out there, not the deadheads, not the know-nothings, not the chicken hawks. They're with us. Don't let anybody intimidate you into silence. It's time for all of us to speak truth to power. Our sons and daughters are being killed. They're being maimed by the tens of thousands. They're being poisoned by depleted uranium by the hundreds of thousands. Their children are being born with birth defects, horrible birth defects at an alarming rate. We're being lied to about all of that as well. Our sons and daughters in uniform are being dehumanized, emotionally damaged, psychologically destroyed. They're being made not just to kill, but to hate. Those who return are prone to domestic violence, divorce, and suicide. The lies, the killing, and the destruction of our young sons and daughters must not continue. We must end it. Patriotism demands that we speak truth to power and that we support what's left of our troops by bringing them home now. Together we can do it. We can get the truth out there to the American people. We're on the verge. We've got half the people with us. We've got to go after the other half. And together, we can take back our country and get the liars the heck out of there. God bless America, and God grant us regime change in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
All right. Now that was a really good one, and people listened to what he said. In the meantime, I've got another one to play for you. This is 9/11 Eyewitness. It's by Richard Spiegel. It's about a half hour long, so stand by here and I'll get it going. Here we go.
This is the story of a 9/11 eyewitness, Richard A. Siegel, who filmed the World Trade Center from across the Hudson River in Hoboken. His raw footage contains a digital recording of explosions that occurred before each tower fell, indicating that both towers were brought down by controlled demolition along with 7 World Trade. Following numerous pre-collapse explosions, clouds of dust can be seen rising hundreds of feet from the base of the towers. We'll watch as an apparent helicopter rescue results in the collapse of the South Tower. We'll see how the reinforced elevator floors directly below the South Tower impact zone should cause the top section to topple into the street in a genuine collapse. We'll see how the official story violates Newton's 3 laws of motion, the law of inertia, the law of conservation of momentum, and we'll see that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. We'll examine the explosive upward ejection of North Tower debris using the laws of projectile motion. We'll see how the collapsing tower's seismic data in the FEMA report contradicts the law of conservation of energy. Were the laws of science magically suspended during 9/11? Or is the official story a fraud? We'll measure 7 world trade at free fall speed in a vacuum created by demolition explosions. We'll hear leaseholder Silverstein reveal this truth in a PBS documentary that mysteriously went out of production. Prepare yourself for the classified truth about what actually happened during U.S. War Game Exercise Week. There is a problem with the World Trade Center demolition plan. Firemen have reached the South Tower impact zone and reported by radio that the fire is under control.
Buddy, come on over by us. I got it, 1-5. We got 2 isolated pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. I know that. 78 floors. Numerous 1045 call horns. What stair you in? South Stairway, Adam. South Tower. 478. South floor. Numerous civilians. We have 2 engines up here. 10-4, we're on our way. 7 Hospital Lobby Command Post. Chief Parliament reports on the 78 floor, numerous 1045 code 1. We got isolated pockets of fire. We're going to need 2 handlines up there, K.
While the brave firemen prepare to extinguish the isolated pockets of fire with 2 hose lines, the evildoers must move up the timetable. If the fires are put out, there will be no reason for the towers to fall.
It was very much like a controlled demolition when you look at it, because the building essentially fell almost vertically down, as if someone had deliberately set blasts to take place to cause the building to fall vertically downward.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was like, if they had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Let's examine the first steel frame collapse in history. The World Trade Center South Tower starts to lean at a sharp angle. Broadcast footage indicates black smoke and no visible flames prior to collapse. This Las Vegas hotel will provide a steel frame comparison. What do you think will happen next? A. The tall section will collapse under its own weight. B. The tall section will fall over in one piece like a tree. Given the high strength and rigidity of steel frame structures, the top section of the South Tower should fall over in one piece. Here the sun shines through the newly completed North Tower, revealing the strong lateral reinforcing steel structure necessary to support heavy sky lobby elevator motors. The towers were made in 3 sections with 1 reinforced floor above and 2 below each sky lobby. Each floor had 1 acre of 4-inch thick concrete poured into steel pans and covered with carpet to make the structure fire resistant. Any internal office fires on 9/11 would be visible from the outside. Visitors transferred from express elevators to local elevators at each sky lobby. Large open spaces in the sky lobby require lateral supports on the floor above and 2 floors below. Lightweight trusses were not used on all floors. Heavy steel I-beams were used to provide lateral reinforcement for elevator floors. Welding steel together prevents collapse. Newton's 3 laws of motion require the top 25-floor welded steel framework to fall into the street in one piece. Why didn't this happen? The South Tower had been smoking for less than an hour when an unexpected shock traumatized the public via network television. Upon closer inspection, synchronized white detonation flashes become clearly visible. They reveal the 15-story detonation zone, programmed to implode over the next few seconds, creating the illusion of a collapse. Additional sequenced detonation flashes become visible during the collapse, indicating the destruction of the internal welded steel framework. As we rewind for a second look, we once again notice numerous telltale flashes of high-velocity demolition explosives in activated sequence. Implosion World's website illustrates how concrete dust is blown outward, while steel columns are sliced in half using a high-velocity explosive like RDX. The tower exhibits similar white flashes and concrete dust, confirming that indeed the collapse represents controlled demolition. Right at the beginning of the collapse, a row of explosions are visible along with a bright flash. Yet no floors have collapsed at this level. Next, we will look at how the top section did not crush the lower section, but actually turned to dust from the bottom up. We see the right corner section still intact, with clouds of light-colored concrete dust ejected symmetrically. Next, we will examine how the 15-floor zone from the 80th to 95th floor turns to dust within seconds. 10 floors have imploded. Rows of detonations are visible along with RDX flashes. Multiple detonation flashes are visible. Machine floor detonations are necessary to destroy lateral supports. Within the first few seconds of collapse, 15 floors have imploded, while the base section of the tower below the sky lobby remains intact. The corner section is still intact, ruling out any pancake collapse. An eastern view of the South Tower collapse confirms the evidence for a controlled demolition. As the detonation sequence begins, a bright flash is visible below the row of ejected concrete dust. A quick sequence of detonation flashes are visible, as firemen reported in oral history testimony that was suppressed for 4 years. The next row of explosions occur several rows below and to the left. Any notion of a pancake collapse should be easily dispelled by this image. A side detonation sequence occurs below the collapse level, ejecting concrete dust outward on 3 floors at the same time. The computer-controlled demolition sequence is cascading downward as fast as debris falls through air. These early moments of the implosion, The separation between black smoke collapse zone at the top and the white concrete powder explosions ejecting debris at high speed out the side of the tower become clearly visible. This is direct evidence for pre-planted demolition explosives. Finally, we see the right corner section still intact with clouds of light concrete dust ejected symmetrically. High-power explosives used in a modern computer-controlled demolition produce ejected debris followed by comet tails of pulverized concrete dust. Controlled Demolition Group's website explains how demolition blasters load explosives on several different levels of the building so that the building structure falls down upon itself at multiple points. When everything is planned and executed correctly, the total damage of the explosives and falling building material is sufficient to collapse the structure entirely, so cleanup crews are left with only a pile of rubble. The controlled demolition in Philadelphia obeys the law of increasing entropy. Once the top section begins to lean at a sharp angle, it becomes more disorganized and continues to fall over. However, the South Tower violates the law of increasing entropy and becomes more organized as the top section disintegrates and does not fall over. Characteristic detonations can be seen from another angle. The seismic record from Palisades, New York, as published in the FEMA report, indicates massive peak signals of short duration, typical of high-velocity military weapons-grade explosives, that registered 2.1 and 2.3 on the Richter scale. These are 15 times larger than the plane impacts and huge fireball explosions. Collapsing debris can be seen forming a tail signal, similar in scale to the impacts, following the explosive peaks that run off the bottom of the chart for the North Tower. Upon returning to the World Trade Center for the first time since 9/11, Rick went in search of the cause of the tower's collapse. According to the official story, office furniture like this was ignited by jet fuel and weakened the thick steel framework.
Honestly, I never thought the towers would collapse. It just never occurred to me. They had stood there since 1970 when we opened, and it just didn't seem possible.
The towers were made up of heavy steel that had been designed for superior strength.
High-strength steel that had not been available before made this possible.
Building cranes were positioned on the internal steel framework made up of 47 heavy steel supports, indicating just how sturdy this internal structure was. However, the official theory explaining the collapse of the towers claims that an ordinary office furniture fire could actually be responsible for weakening heavy steel to the point of collapse. Imagine all the chefs who cook over a hot blue flame without melting their frying pans. The idea that a much weaker office furniture fire could cause any harm to these steel frame towers is pure fantasy, and therefore required a suitable dramatization to fool the public. A respected science show, Nova, faced the challenge of convincing the public that the impossible was actually the only possible explanation. To do this, it was first necessary to describe the steel supports in the towers as thinner and weaker than they actually were.
But the tall vertical columns of the inner core and the outer walls were like freestanding stilts until Robertson tied them together with floor trusses.
The next step was to create a pancake collapse simulation. Since this is impossible using the laws of science, it was first necessary to remove the outer wall supports that carry 40% of the tower's weight. Since office fires would have negligible effect on the steel structure, it was also necessary to remove all floor connections with the internal support structure. finally the simulation would run. But will 110 floors really collapse like pancakes in 10 seconds? Let's time it to find out. The first floor to collapse took 1.5 seconds to fall 12 feet. The second floor was faster at 1 second for a total of 2.5 seconds. As the gravity collapse starts to speed up, ignoring the hundreds of internal and external welded connections supporting each floor, we see 10 floors have collapsed after 6 seconds. This clearly indicates that the official pancake collapse theory cannot begin to explain how the buildings fell in just 10 seconds, and is so unreasonable that it should be immediately rejected out of common sense. Yet it has become the conventional wisdom of the day, and we must all pause and ask ourselves how this could have come about. Our heartfelt condolences go out to the relatives and our prayers to the victims in the towers. Victims like Edna Cintron, who was in her office working in the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. This photo of Edna appeared in the official FEMA report analyzing the damage to the North Tower. She bravely climbed through the debris at the impact zone to wave to news helicopters and let them know that the fires had gone out and the survivors were awaiting rescue. Perhaps she believed that the worst was over and that firefighters would soon arrive. After all, steel frame buildings have never collapsed anywhere in the world before 9/11. Yet on this day, 3 steel frame structures would free fall at the speed of gravity, normally only possible with demolition explosives that take months of preparation. As the official reports state, the jet fuel would have burned away within minutes, and we can see that indeed the fire looks like it is going out on its own. An accompanying diagram illustrates the interlocking steel grid that made up the outer framework of the towers.
I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
Fortunately, to silence any skeptics, Edna was photographed from several angles and even videotaped and aired on CBS television. However, Edna's story is one that the architects of 9/11 do not want told to the public because it causes people to disregard the unrealistic concept of the steel frame towers being weakened by office fires and collapsing like a house of cards. In reality, the towers were so strong that massive explosions were required to shatter the steel framework into pieces. Let's take a closer look at World Trade Center 1.
I did pass through a couple of parks and on some of the streets, and before, when I reported about an hour ago, there were people at their gas pumps who turned to look at the smoke that was coming from the city. Folks stepping out of bodegas and stores to look. Now people are gathering in large groups. In fact, in one corner, I saw a group of people actually holding hands and praying. As I stand on the Manhattan Bridge, which is closed, it is open to pedestrian traffic. Some people but there's just no way for them to, as I look out, something is that I can't. And then the building just disappearing in the smoke. It's an incredible sight. People around with a thing of I cannot even describe it. It is one of those real honestly, you just can't describe it. It looks as though it was a puff of cloud.
When the second building came down, it left that spire, and I saw it. It looked like a church spire in there. But then that's like, and that's like, what knocked that down? There was no fire on the bottom, and certainly no more pressure on it. So how come that all of a sudden decided it would fall too? It's a strange occurrence, but I tell you, at the time I didn't think of it, but saw the spire and I thought, oh, the building, you know, we're going to have this huge wreck sitting there, and like, it went. Now, how did the whole thing go down?
How did the whole thing go down? From a closer angle, some interesting details of the North Tower collapse become visible. Next, we will examine how the transmission tower drops first, indicating that the central core steel framework containing 47 heavy supports started to collapse before the outer steel framework. This collapse mechanism is opposite to the South Tower and was noted in official reports, creating one of the most amazing paradoxes of the entire 9/11 illusion. Here we can see two puffs of white ejected debris clearly visible that indicate internal roof truss demolition occurred before the external collapse started. Rooftop detonations produce white dust clouds around the falling transmission tower. A row of ejected white concrete dust is visible before the first floor fully collapses, confirming explosive detonations. A puff of ejected dust appears above the collapsed row of ejected dust that is already 30 feet outside the tower when the first two floors collide, confirming the impossibility of a pancake collapse. As the North Tower collapses, bright flashes of thermite become visible within the falling debris. Here we see a thermite reaction experiment, which illustrates the bright glow of this typical demolition explosive in action. A second later, we can clearly see that the thermite is burning on a tall steel beam in order to weaken it in conjunction with cutting charges such as RDX. Finally, we observe that ejected white concrete debris clouds created from the explosive heat energy of the controlled demolition rise up high above the original top of the tower roof level. This would be impossible if a simple collapse of cold steel and concrete had occurred 15 floors below, and provides another clear indication of massive explosive heat energy released on the scale of a small nuclear explosion.
Then I realized it was like this yellowish gray because of the powder and dust that had fallen underneath, and it still left colors. And this ominous color was there instead of a building.
Let's take a closer look at the North Tower implosion. At the first detonation level, a demolition squib is visible, indicating advanced sequencing of explosions is occurring inside the tower. From a closer angle, we can more clearly see the advanced demolition squibs ejecting concrete dust at high speed in a symmetrical pattern. We also notice the detonations progressing down the right side of the building at the same speed as the free-fall debris. On the left side, we see vaporized heavy steel beams leaving a trail behind as they fall. This clear evidence of controlled demolition far below the collapse level proves without a doubt that the official story of a pancake collapse is a complete fraud designed to fool the public. As we watch the North Tower implosion once again, we notice demolition squibs ejected from 2 floors simultaneously on the right side of the tower. Some skeptics have suggested that air pressure down elevator shafts could be responsible for this. However, it is a typical feature of controlled demolitions, and the equal spacing between levels of ejected dust and the central positioning rule out any random element of chance. As the implosion progresses, the second level of demolition squibs come into view. These are clearly visible from other camera angles using forward and reverse playback. As heavy steel beams are ejected from the first detonation level marked in yellow, debris from the start of the collapse can be seen falling close to the side of the tower. It appears that the non-horizontal arc of the projectile motion matches a 45-degree upward ejection angle.
We have a long history of successful steel construction in this country and in fact the world. And one of the great successes is that under normal fire conditions, we don't have building collapse. In fact, until 9/11, I was unaware of any protected steel structure that had collapsed anywhere in the world from just a fire.
Major difficulties around the area. New Jersey Transit outbound Hoboken Terminal operating on a load-and-go basis, no inbound service, and also out of Newark Penn Station, limited service on the north.
You know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, well, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and, you know, it was horrifying. And then, you know, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. You know, we were in shock.
This computer simulation of a building implosion illustrates the typical sequence of high-power detonations used to bring down a structure neatly within its own footprint. Key support columns are destroyed in sequence beginning at the center to force the sides to fold inward and not damage neighboring buildings and allow the weight of the structure to do most of the work. The demolition industry term pullet is commonly used to describe a man-made implosion of a structure during demolition.
People starting to run away from the scene, and I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. Looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself, and another big, huge plume of gray and white smoke shooting up into the air, and then more of the smoke billowing up the street here.
Hot gases carrying dust and debris flow along the ground with a fluid motion. It requires explosive energy to generate the necessary heat, dust, and debris. Turbulence and fluidization of debris are characteristic. A pyroclastic surge can even flow over water as hot gases carry dust created by explosive energy. Here, the South Tower implosion creates a pyroclastic surge moving out over the Hudson River.
The World Trade Center has just crumbled, collapsed in a pile of dust. This approximately less than an hour after it was hit by an aircraft.
The second building completely down.
The U.S. Geological Survey website provides us with a definition of a pyroclastic flow as a ground-hugging avalanche of hot gas and debris. The rising gas chimney is clearly visible in this photo of the North Tower implosion with pyroclastic flows between buildings. The cauliflower shape of the debris clouds is a telltale sign of pyroclastic flows generated by massive explosions typical of volcanic eruptions and controlled demolitions.
If you're just joining us this morning, you're in for a horrific surprise. Both buildings of the World Trade Center have been hit by aircraft, and the South Tower of the World Trade Center has apparently collapsed in a pile of dust. What did you see?
Oh, lots of smoke, and then the next thing I heard an explosion, and the building from the top, the south building, just crumbled.
After a 3-year-long court battle, part of the firefighter and emergency worker eyewitness testimony was finally released to the public. Here are some excerpts that are confirmed by Rick's original video containing multiple explosions prior to the collapse of both towers.
Okay, wake up, stand up for your rights. That's the fact. And all right, now we're just about done with this show. I've got one more little video to show you here, assuming I find it. You see, we've got endless war, hundreds of thousands of people dead, torture, habeas corpus gone, civil rights. How about executive privilege beyond all intelligence? It doesn't make any sense at all. If you want any of that to stop, you have to expose 9/11. You have to expose the inside job of 9/11. You have to expose the fraud for what it is, because everything else is based on that. Everything else that they've done, taken away every right, bombed millions of people, and I'm talking millions. It's now known that millions of people are dead because of us in Iraq, or at least 1 million. You got to be more precise, I guess. But the point is, how can you separate the emotions sometimes? If you want it to stop, you have to take away their phony excuse. That's all there is to it. So anyway, let's see if I can get this going here quick enough. Oh, yeah, we got it here. And here we go.
What are you talking about?
We bugged Mr. Blake's cell.
I'll start it. Here we go.
We hid it up in the cell window. We hid it up in the cell window.
Wait a minute. What are you talking about?
We bugged Mr. Blake's cell.
You what?
We bugged the cell with Arnold's tape recorder. Just listen to this, Paul.
I can't listen to that.
But Paul.
Opie, I can't listen to that. I'm not permitted.
But Paul, you don't understand.
Opie, I can't listen to this. Now, I told you about eavesdropping.
But Paul, this is different.
Okay.
Yes, it's worse. You overheard a conversation that was supposed to be private. Now, I can't be a party to that.
But Paul, if you just listen to this...
Opie, I can't listen.
Paul, you're erasing the tape.
That's what I mean to do. You bugged a conversation between a lawyer and his client. Now, that's violating one of the most sacred rights of privacy.
But Paul...
No buts.
But if it helps the law...
Opie, the law can't use this kind of help. Because whether a man is guilty or innocent, we have to find that out by due process of law.
It's playing, it's not recording. What the hell? Oh, there he goes. All right. I know this is kind of a seat of the pants type of thing. Take a look at my library on the way out. make a collection. I'll show a new DVD or a different DVD each week.
Also, even his theory, when he said we are going to fight them there to prevent them from coming to us, it is very, very expensive theory. It is very, very lethal theories. Okay, he killed 1 million Iraqi there, 1 million Iraqi, and in order to protect the American. And the American is still not safe. And the world is not safer. As we said, he said he will end Al-Qaeda, he will end terrorism, or weaken it. But what's happening? It's actually he's strengthening terrorism. We used to have 1 Al-Qaeda, now we have 10 Al-Qaedas. And it's like Kentucky Fried Chicken, actually. They are expanding every day, opening branch all over the world. Franchises, yes. So that's the problem. So he said, and his actually poodle, Tony Blair, they said to us, the world will be safer. It's not safer. The American, they are not safer. It's a fortress now, United States of security. Imagine how many billions Americans spent for after the war against terrorism. Until now, $600 billion spent on these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what's the outcome? More Al-Qaeda, more attacks, more threats, more instability, more insecurity, more security measures in the airports, more actually security measures in the American embassies. It is like a fortress, the American embassies all over the world. After $600 billion, imagine that, and the American people are not feeling safe. After losing more than 3,000 soldiers in Iraq, and American people are not safe. And, it's crazy, to be honest.
Well, it seems to fit in, though, the part of the strategy of bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. I believe I read somewhere bin Laden said he wanted to provoke, to goad the Americans, the United States, into bleeding wars, as he called them. I mean, he knows he cannot defeat them militarily.
Yes. I remember I asked him, I asked bin Laden, what's your strategy? You are actually challenging the biggest superpower on earth. So do you think you can defeat, this superpower? He said, no, I cannot defeat it, because this is a huge superpower. But I can actually launch a war of attrition against them. I said, what do you mean? He said, if I manage to bring them to our part of the world and fight them in my field, in my turf, my own turf, on the middle of the Arab and the Muslim worlds, this will be fatal for them. It will be another Vietnam. So it seems he